Hello and welcome back to the Without Limits podcast. We are now at episode 24. This one is going to be a little bit bittersweet because it signifies the end of what we're calling season 1. We're going to take a short break before we come back with season 2, and we are going to we've gathered some pretty hot guests to kickstart the next season. I say bittersweet because it's been an absolute labour of love. 24 episodes in, we've hit a couple of milestones, we've had some amazing guests, the feedback's been fantastic. We've had, a really good time up until now. And I wanted to, in conjunction with Sam, I wanted to make sure that we protect the value that we're bringing on this platform. You know, if we're going to ask you guys to sit down and listen to us or listen to me for an hour plus, we want to make sure that we're flooding your ears and your eyeballs with as much value as possible, and just keep the credibility of the episodes coming as high as possible. So given I've had a lot of travel over the last couple of weeks and months, and there's been a lot going on within the Marchon business, I haven't been able to give as much attention to the podcast as I've liked to. And we've taken a conscious decision just to put our foot on the ball for a couple of weeks as we gather a bit more momentum going into season 2. So today's episode is still designed to bring you a number of bits of value, and we'll recap over what we've done so far. Sam's going to be hosting. I'm going to be answering the questions. I'm sure I'll say thank you again at the end, but for now, thank you very much for everyone that's tuned into this podcast over the last 24 episodes. I will try and fill you with one more episode of good value before we take a short break.
Very well said. So here we are, number 24. This episode is just going to be sort of a recap and just going over some of the moments that we've had over the last 24 episodes. So to start off with, a question that's not on the list. How did the podcast sort of come to be, and what did you sort of see it being before we'd started this journey?
It's a fucking curveball because you sent me the questions before we started.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Like it. So my role within the business this year was to predominantly try and kick down a few doors, try and grow the brand, bring more eyeballs into what we're doing, and also try and create a bit more of an intimate connection with our audience and the different channels that we had. We were playing very heavily on social media, Instagram being the main platform, and I've always wanted to do some more longer form content. And I'm very lucky that I've got a great network of people, that trusted peers from the fitness industry, but also outside of that, the world of business, entertainment, my relationship with many athletes from my time in sport, and I think just also the synergy between what Marchon stands for and also what competitive sport people, athletes, the things they're interested in. So it's about leveraging those relationships and trying to give my community, or our community as the Marchon community, an opportunity to listen to those people speak, and also plug some of the holes in my knowledge of where they're at. So, as I just said 5 minutes ago, very much a labour of love. We're serving a few different purposes: longer form content for the Marchon listeners, access to some really cool people with cool conversations, and also showcasing some of the people within the Marchon business. You know, we've had Chad on, we've had the Calvert sisters, we've had my wife Lauren, we've had Paddy and Liam, and we'll go on to have more people. Just showcase them and shine a light on the efforts that they bring to work each and every day and why they're special people.
And what are some of the things that you've seen off the back of the podcast in terms of what have people told you, the listeners in a sense, what have they told you about the episodes, or how have you seen it bring people a bit closer to the brand?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I've kind of got back from it from listeners is that there's no real predictability as to who people want to listen to. You know, some guests that we've had that are world champions in their sport, or have got millions of followers on social media, the people that maybe have the most personal brand or notoriety. So I'm not saying they've been bad episodes or people have given bad feedback, but they've almost not been mentioned by some people giving me feedback, and the feedback's been about people closer to home. So I think it shows that the people that are in the Marchon community want to know a little bit more about some of the people that are associated with the Marchon brand. But I do think, and we've discussed this at some length, it's very important for us to have people outside of our sphere of kind of influence or outside the business to try and bring different pockets of people into what we do. But the feedback's been great. I just think, like I said, there's been no rhyme or reason to what people have said. One person, many people have said the Lauren, my wife's episode was amazing. Other people, it's Steve Cook, it's Hunter. I think there's different things for different people, which has been probably the beauty of the podcast.
Have you considered, just on a moment of reflection, about sort of the podcast as a format, right? So in terms of social media, the stuff that you post every day, even if it's on stories or reels, it's all very short in terms of the time that people are seeing that for. When people are sitting down and listening to an episode, it's an hour plus long. And in terms of the total hours, it's hundreds of thousands of hours. If you look at the analytics, is that something you've considered in terms of how long people have digested content that we've put out now?
Completely, because I think if we look at the strategy, I use the word strategy lightly, but if we look at what we're doing with my social media page, a lot of it's not necessarily about high levels of value. A lot of it is trying to, like, top of the funnel awareness, trying to reach more people. I think what I do quite well is bring people into what I'm about via stories. But again, you're relying on algorithm, you're relying on that given day, people's attention being on your page, and then someone else might pop up on their feed, or another story might get preference over yours. So it's very hard to try and build momentum there, because you're at the mercy of the algorithm and also other great creators. But I think if you get someone to sit down, tune into your podcast for that hour plus, you're a market of one. There's no one else that's really distracting them. Of course, people might listen to chunks of the episode and come back to it, but you're really able to get someone to sit down and listen in and concentrate. And I think that's the beauty of podcasts, right? You're investing more time, energy, effort into an individual or set of individuals. So that's what I said about that piece of, I think that the connection becomes a little bit more intimate. And I think you see true, I use the word fans lightly too, but I think you see true fans of the brand or the people. And it's just like a podcast that I would listen to. I'm a true fan, or what's the word I'm looking for? A true advocate of the Chris Williamsons of the world, because you believe in everything that they're interested in. You've got a lot of shared alignment with them, so you think that guests that they're going to bring on that they're going to find interesting, you'd find interesting too.
And I think we've genuinely built a different audience now, right? Like at the start of the first few episodes, it was always based off of, obviously it was a new show, people didn't know about it, but we could use your channel to talk about that and bring people in, and every episode, every week, we could then do a promotion for it. It kind of showed last week when we had this week we had some issues with Instagram, so we couldn't post promotions, but actually look at the analytics, the numbers were kind of the same, because that audience is now kind of separate. And they're waiting for the content that we're putting out consistently. So it's nice to think about that audience is kind of built and is building, but it is separated from the other audiences that maybe we have as a brand. Yeah,
I was somewhere with Lauren like 3 weeks ago, and someone came up I was at the airport. We were coming back from South Africa, Charlie's wedding. Someone came up to me and said, "Oh, you're the guy from YouTube." And I think I'm the guy if anyone's going to recognize me, I spend all my time on Instagram. But he just knew me from YouTube. So it just shows that there are, different platforms with different types of people that will know you for those different platforms. And I think it goes back to those great creators, right? They diversify the platforms that they're on. Gary Vee talks about this all the time. So that, there might be some cross-pollination of certain people, but if you can build pockets of communities on different platforms, then ultimately you're probably playing a bigger game.
And is there something to be said in a wider sense to people that are maybe listening to this that have started a podcast or started an Instagram page and they're at that zero number of followers or engagement or whatever, to say that any number of people that are tuning in to listen to you is valuable, if that makes sense? Because obviously we have a big audience on Instagram, you do, the brand does, but if that one person only saw you on YouTube and the numbers are slightly low on YouTube, and if you look at that as like an analytical point, you think, the numbers are lower on YouTube than everything else. But actually the value that one person saw through that one channel was like quite incredible. So what do you think that means as a broader message to people that are looking at low numbers of followers or engagement, etc., to sort of look at the value of that?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think people get disheartened all the time because, like I said, particularly with social media, where followers is largely down to trying to create a piece of viral content and the follower numbers go up, and that's how we measure success. But a lot of people have said this, actually, influential people have said, if you sat down to talk to a room of 200 people or 500 people, you would shit yourself, because it's a lot of people. So whether you've got 100 listeners, 200, 2,000, particularly those early days, like they're going to be your biggest fans, and they're coming with you for the start of the journey. So I think the worst thing you can do is not get started. The worst thing you can do is get disheartened if you don't have instant success. I think if I look at our Instagram page or my page, and I think of myself on social media, still don't have the biggest following, but a very bought-in followership because we've been really consistent and we've been super tried to stay as authentic as possible over the last decade almost. So I think that's the important thing. It's like get started, continue doing it, be consistent, and try and give your audience, as within reason, as much of you as possible, so that they can really get an understanding of why they should continue to follow you and align themselves with the behaviours and values that you stand for.
Yeah, amazing. So to move on to the podcast then, over the last 24 episodes, we've had lots of guests, lots of topics. So let's just go through some points here to see what your sort of personal favourites and bits that we've learnt from. So season highlights. So what were some of the standout moments or episodes even as a whole from the last 24 episodes? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think a real highlight was filming in LA. I think that was just cool. Being able to film a podcast when we were in LA for a week with Ross, who's a super cool dude, in the setting in George's villa in the Hollywood Hills. I thought that was awesome. I think having the opportunity to sit down with Steve Cook, just shooting him a DM a week prior, knowing that he's coming to London, and he's like, yeah, sure, where do I need to be and what time? Steve is someone that is such an OG of the fitness industry. Anyone that has been in the fitness industry a long time will know that guy is the originator of brand ambassador, super good dude, really humble. And for him to be able to take time out of his busy schedule, I thought was amazing. So it was kind of weird seeing Steve sit opposite the table and also having him in the gym. But also when I think back at that, I think we've got to a stage now with the brand that there's mutual benefit for people coming on the podcast. And, with thanks to all the listeners and people that share it, we're giving people, a platform to talk about stuff that they're really interested in too. So I need to be really just mindful of that. We're able to give back to the guests. So I think, being in LA, having Steve on, even having Lauren on, my wife, I think it was a really cool episode, being able to sit down with her. I think it was received really well. I think it gave her loads of confidence as well. I think it's not a massive thing for Lauren, but it is something, and I think it's something for a lot of women that as they kind of lose as their identity of shifts from being whatever their career is or what they're interested in prior to kids, and when they have kids, it is a very tough transition, and you can sometimes just be labelled as a mum and don't really have opportunities to be much else. And not that Lauren wants to be honest, but I think it just gave her some confidence that she has some real value in things that people really resonate with and that find interesting.
I'm not sure how much it was said or people know, but Lauren was very nervous before that episode, right? She always is before filming content, but it's always well received. People always love to see her. So that sort of platform for her was, seeing the messages underneath the post that we put out, everything, it was so nice to see that people were supporting the fact that she was being shone on a little bit more.
Yeah, and she would never play on any of it. She'd never let on, but you could just tell there was a real spring in her step for the next couple of weeks, which I think was really nice. And I think we've been able to gather a bit of momentum with her, with her impact then in the brand. It's been a bit stop-start at times, but I think it's that was definitely the catalyst for that. I'd say they're probably my top three moments.
Cool. So moving on. What was the most surprising insight? So anything that you've learned from any of what the guests have said or even the stories that they've told us, or anything that sticks out in terms of the insights that it's given you personally?
I think the Hunter episode was an interesting one. And I say that because through the lens of, High Rocks is such a big thing at the moment, and I'm sure it continues to grow and grow. But it's still very much an amateur sport, right? It's a grassroots sport. It's designed for the everyday man, everyday woman. Not very well funded, based on what Hunter said. Just to see that he locks himself away in a cabin, again in the Hollywood Hills, for 10 months of the year and just goes ham to become High Rocks world champion or High Rocks world record holder. I think it's commendable. I think it's really inspirational. But I think it's quite interesting that you see just what sport means to people. I use High Rocks as the example. I think back to my younger days in sport, and I'm sure anyone else that's played a sport of any type, you don't really care what you're going to get in return. In combat sports, it's the same. Don't get paid much, sleeping on sofas, just for the love of the game. And I think that's there's something very pure about that. There comes a time when you've got to grow up, when your priorities have to shift because of family or commitments and whatever else. But I think that moment when you're just trying to be the very best athlete that you can be, there's something very pure about that. And hearing Hunter talk about it, his passion for it, his commitment to it, and also the fact that he's just a ruthless savage and at the top of his game, I thought that was a really cool moment.
I think what was really cool about that episode is obviously we got the pleasure of spending a bit of time with him before in... Was it Miami or LA?
Yeah, Miami.
Somewhere. And through a couple of training sessions, etc. And you could tell through just speaking to him for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you're like, this guy's different. But hearing him for an hour talk about the reason that he's different and being able to share that with everyone else that doesn't know the guy himself, that was really special, I think, because we got to have that inside chat with him, and then that hour-long episode was really the building of who he was and how he became who he was. So everyone else then got to see like Hunter as the athlete through all the high rock stuff, but then actually how he got there was like an incredible story that we didn't really know before.
Yeah, I think Hunter's episode has been one of the highest viewed, particularly on YouTube. And again, the feedback for that was like, oh, I didn't know he was like that. I didn't know he was that articulate. I didn't know he was that way inclined around other things that kind of support him being the athlete. They just see this jovial, ruthless at times, serious but also funny guy on social media. So I think, yeah, it was great to hear him open up a little bit more, give some context to how he's got to where he's at, get an insight into how his brain works, and I think people really liked it.
So moving on, so this is slightly close to that. So personal growth. So how's your personal growth been since starting the podcast in terms of what has this podcast allowed you to grow with, if that makes sense? What are the points you think have really made a difference for you over the last however many episodes?
I think the technical side of like podcasting, I think I've had to develop. I still think I'm very raw in that sense, but the technical side of podcasting, referenced before, that I think it's going to get harder and harder as we become less familiar with some of the guests. So a lot more research has to go into episodes. But I think we've been very fortunate that we're kind of protecting the podcast right now as to giving time to people who we have a good relationship with. So I've already got a very good understanding. So there's some sort of things that stack up for me that I know them really well too, and we're able to sit down. It's quite natural, good rapport straight off the bat. But I do think you have to find ways to deliver your questions so that you can keep a conversation flowing. I think you've got to be really attentive. I think you've got to try and take the listeners on a bit of a journey so that you can complete the circle or close the loops on a few things that guests will say, because sometimes they might take themselves off on a bit of a tangent. So I think like the technical side of podcasting, whilst I'm still very, very new to it and lots to learn, I think I've had to really develop there.
What's sort of going on in your head? Has that changed at all in terms of the conversation you're having in your head while the guest is speaking? Has that changed from the first episode till now? Is there any sort of different... Are you thinking about what the viewer might be listening to or ways in which you want to take the conversation? Because I could imagine if you're having a conversation, especially with someone like Steve Cook, right, you're super interested in him as a person, you know a lot of his background, it'd be easy just to try and have an hour conversation with him without thinking about what the viewer might get from that. Is that a consideration while you're speaking to guests?
It is a consideration, but selfishly I do kind of think to myself, if the listeners are anything like I am, they're going to want to know the same things that I want to know.
Yeah.
I think unless it's like something like Ollie Patrick, for example, fantastic episode where we're talking really about black and white kind of principles or science and things that are fairly... There's definitive start points and end points to each bit of those conversations, and so, each little bit of conversation that happens within the broader podcast interview. Whereas something with Steve, for example, you kind of meander into different places. But I'm certainly thinking about it. Obviously, I normally have my iPad next to me and I've got a list of questions that are there. The main things is that you kind of want to get through your questions. You believe that you've done your best to try and make the questions have a bit of a rhythm to them so that you can kind of go through the podcast and keep the energy in it. But I don't really want to try and make it this chronological order of like, so tell me what happened at this age and then that age, and then. But that kind of does end up happening because some people need a little bit more context and time to build their story out before you get into the meat and potatoes of the main things that you want to try and get them to talk about. So yeah, being really attentive, making sure that you're kind of sticking to your script, that also, I say script, sticking to your line of questioning, but also then listening because there might be something that they say that you can go into a little bit more detail on.
And how sort of critical are you with the episodes now? Has that changed at all throughout in terms of listening back to them or picking out things that personally you want to sort of work on? Is that something that happens?
Yeah, I think I always ask you, like, how do you find the episode straight after we come out? I think I'm always going to be super critical of my own performance within an episode. But I think the reality is for me, luckily, hopefully the podcast is never the thing that's going to put food on the table for me. If it does get to that stage, I'm doing something really well. But for me, it's like this amazing outlet that we get to, all the things I said at the start, we get to sit down with some cool people and hopefully provide value to the listeners. So it's not life or death for me. I still want to obviously show up, bring the energy, do my best, but appreciate that it's probably the 10,000 hour thing before I'm going to feel really natural doing podcasting. And at the moment, we're 24 episodes in, so I've got a lot of learning, a lot of time to commit to it before I can really expect myself to be a polished, finished article.
So moving on, behind the scenes. So what goes on behind the scenes that listeners might find interesting about the podcast? Anything that springs to mind?
Interesting. Well, a lot of organisation has to go into the podcast. Obviously, I've got the blessing of having you, who's a whiz on all this technical stuff that I have absolutely no skill set in. So that's obviously a part of it, making sure that we've got everything set up within the studio. We've had a few mishaps so far, but that's, I think, to be expected.
You want to talk through those? Anything that stands out?
Who was the episode with that I had to start again 30 minutes in? Tom Foxley?
Yeah.
So that was actually a day where you weren't here.
Yeah.
I think you were ill. Were you ill?
I was ill, yeah.
You were ill. Young Harrison stepped in. Saviour. So big up Harrison for stepping in. We started and I could just tell there was something off a little bit with the mics. In fact, there's been a few episodes that we've put out with the mic. The sound hasn't been quite as crisp as we'd liked. We have upgraded the mics since our original mics. Sometimes when we have more than one guest on, we have to rely on the old mic. We've actually just ordered some more new mics today. So it's a constant learning process. You hear an episode back, you're like, fuck, we need to make that a little bit better. But yeah, Harrison stepped in. I think you'd called him or he called you to make sure we'd set it up okay. We started recording, went through what does Without Limits mean to you, got into sort of like 10 minutes in, I'm like, I just don't think this is right.
Yeah. And
we had to stop it and start it all again. So that was, I'm sure that sort of thing happens. Other than that, like it's clearly really, because I've just said I'm not a professional podcaster and it's not really where I want my career to go. Because I just think there are people doing it far better than me, so I can't be the best in the world at that, whereas I think we can build the best fitness brand with Marchon. So that's where my real attention needs to be. The reason I raised that point is because I can't give all of my time to podcasts in 5 days a week, and also guests have very busy schedules themselves, so trying to line up a time and a date, particularly where we want to try and do them in person and make the experience a little bit more, I guess, pleasurable for the listener, so it's not on Zoom. That's really difficult because we've got to rely on them being in the vicinity of Harpenden or wishing to travel to, me being around at the same time and us being able to sit down to have that episode. So I think the logistics of that's quite difficult, which is probably why we're also getting to the stage where we're going to try and release it in seasons for the time being.
It's a fair point. So moving on, so unexpected moments. Is there any sort of unexpected moments that have turned out to be highlights from this season in terms of even getting guests or some of the stories that you've heard?
I think the guests we've had outside of Marchon for our type of listener has been world class. Hunter, Steve Cook, Ryan Fisher, Will Googe, the Heaton brothers, Ollie Patrick, Johnny Payne. I think it's just been such a great list of guests, which has been amazing. Other than that, I don't think there's been anything sort of out of the ordinary. There's been a few guests that we've missed out on. The hardest geezer, I kind of had written confirmation in the DMs when he was still in Africa that was going to happen, knowing full well that as soon as he got back into the UK, all the big podcasts were going to be all over him. Obviously, his relationship with Huel and Stephen Bartlett, he's on Diary CEO and whatever else, and I'm sure he's a very busy man now. So that was a bit of a shame not to get him on, because I know there's a lot of people that were looking forward to that. But I've got some good messages out, some goodwill in the market at the moment with a few guests for season 2.
Sounds good. Exciting stuff. So is there anyone, just moving on from that point but slightly attached, is there any guest that's not surprised you, but you, on listening back or even the feedback from the episode, you weren't you didn't realise the impact that maybe the episode was going to have, or the conversation, how good it was going to be, if that makes sense?
I think a lot of people took the episode, myself and Jen's, really well, the one around discipline and high performance. I think that was really powerful for a lot of people. I think, what else? I think people love the episode with Chad. Again, he's my brother, right? So I probably don't give him the credibility he deserves, or would have been overly like, I can't wait to sit down with Chad. Although I was very excited, right, to get him a little bit uncomfortable and to hear what he had to say. But people loved the episode. Like I said, people loved the Lauren episode. People loved the Calvert's episode. I think the most recent ones as well, Sonny Webster, I think was a really, really cool conversation. I think Sonny's shown, or for me personally, having first met him back in 2018, just this huge maturity now in himself as a coach, as himself as an individual, been through a lot, well-travelled now, really successful business. I think he was a really humble, articulate, and showed a deeper level of thinking now to perhaps what people would have assumed, and also what I experienced back in 2018 when I first met him. Feedback was great on that. I think the one more recently with Paddy and Liam as well, I think coaches really liked that as well, and I think that was the intention for me on that episode, was for people to hear from coaches on the front line that have got vast amount of skill in the game, that are still doing it on the gym floor each and every day. A big portion of our listeners are coaches, aspiring coaches, or people who get coaching, whether it's online or in person. So for them to hear what good coaches should be thinking about, and where they should be spending their money, and the sorts of people they should be spending their money with, and what they should expect in return, I thought that was it was a good episode.
Yeah, I was personally really surprised by Sonny. That was the one that came up for me on that question, because I think I didn't know much about him before. I'd only had the social media presence to go off, and listening to an hour of him talking, I was really surprised. Not surprised, I don't know if that's the right word, but I was excited for people to hear that episode, to hear how articulate he was, how much value he brought. And actually the feedback from my close friends who wouldn't have been interested in weightlifting actually got a lot out of that episode in terms of the listen, which I think, again, when we think about how well a podcast went, it's always you and me, right? We're the ones in the room that listen to the podcast. You never really know how people are going to take it. But so far, out of 24 episodes, every episode we've had people tell us that they've got some sort of value from it. So it's a really positive thing. So guest follow-ups. Are there any guests that you'd love to have back on for a follow-up episode if that comes around for next season?
I think the one that I probably don't talk about as much is the Heaton episode. I was so gassed to get George and Mike together. We'd obviously spent that week in Miami with them at the time. I've had a good relationship with George since we first met, but and likewise with Mike. But Mike doesn't, he doesn't go on podcasts. We spoke to that, and he's since done his own YouTube on their Represent series, and you're starting to see a little bit more about the magic of Mike. So I think there's definitely a V2 with George and Mike, but probably most likely just with George. Other than that, I'm sure people within the Marchon's circle will be coming back on. I'm sure Chad's got more to say. Like I said, I think we want to try and give, as well as people giving access to giving people access to friends of our brand and the network of people that hopefully we go on to be exposed to, and we can build relationships with. It's trying to give more insight into the people that they might follow within the Marchon brand. So some of the coaches or people, they might be on the program delivered by Paddy and Liam, or by Jade, for example. They might be buying the supplements that Liam develops. So I think just giving them more access to understand why, because I think that's really important. I think there's just a lot of hype and ways in which you can build hype, and it can become smoke and mirrors. So I think the opportunity to sit down and just see the authenticity of those people is really important. At least it is for me, and what I want this brand to stand for. Which actually makes me think, I haven't mentioned the Liam episodes. I think they were unbelievable in terms of most amount of probably feedback, particularly with both episodes, but V1, I think people saw a huge amount of value in that episode.
You had a lot of people reaching out about
loads of people. Yeah, the feedback was fantastic, and in episode 2 as well. I think mainly because of the way Liam speaks. He speaks very clear. Obviously, he's an expert in what he's talking about. Very well studied. And his ability to distill the science and the more complicated stuff into real actionable, practical things that sound simple, I think that's a superpower of his.
Yeah, I think the nutrition side of podcasting can be a little bit blurry these days. So having someone that's very clued up, and the integrity of you and the brand only wanting to put out information that's correct and that will help people, people get a lot of value out of that. So, future plans. What can listeners expect from the next season?
I'm desperate to get Owen Farrell on the podcast. I know that he's a listener.
We've said it now, so.
Well, I know that he's a listener of this podcast. I don't know whether he listens on Spotify, YouTube, but Faz, get on it. I actually take Leah's football every Monday, and Faz takes his boy as well. And he's always like, who have you got on the podcast this week? So I know he listens. I know he enjoys it. Some of the guests that we've had on. And hopefully between now and him going away to France, we can get him on. I put a few messages out over the last couple of days actually to big sports stars that we can hopefully get on as well. I think just more of the same. I think it's similar. I think we're going to try and have some amazing guests from the world of sports, entertainment, and I think maybe a bit more business as well. I think that we could start to tap in a little bit more there, and also more insight into what we're currently doing with Marchon. It's very easy for us, to the point of nutrition, to go, oh, we just dropped this product, go buy it, join the waiting list. But actually sitting down and talking about some of these products. For some listeners, that might not be what they're interested in, but for us, when we're building this brand, our ability to communicate what we're doing, when we're doing it, why we're doing it, and how it could impact you, I think it's really important. And I think that, like I said, very lucky that the podcast, we can kind of use it as a vehicle for those things. So whilst I still want the hundreds of thousands of followers and downloads and listens, I want the value that the listeners take from it to be really aligned with what we're trying to achieve with Marchon.
I think that speaks to quite a good point about the brand as a whole, especially, we've had a few conversations in the last couple of weeks about what we're putting out and the way that we're saying certain things. And I think it speaks to the integrity of what Marchon is, and every product that we launch, whether it's a new supplement or a t-shirt or, a training plan, nothing is done just to get numbers and just as a financial play. It's always done to say, how does this serve someone in their daily life? Which I don't think people maybe fully understand, right? Especially when we're building products and we're launching new things. Obviously, we want to keep growing, but it's always in the base of, how is this going to better someone's life? Are they going to get more enjoyment out of something? Or is the flavor better? Or, the constant improvements are done through a place of integrity and serving the people that, like you said, you've built this incredible base of people that follow you so intently. And you never want to put a product out that those people are going to buy and they're not happy with. So how do you think that sort of plays into moving forward for the brand? I know this is slightly off topic for the podcast, but it kind of plays back into the episodes, right? You don't want to put anything out that someone might get to after an hour and go, I didn't really get anything out of that.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's obviously why we're taking a short pause for a number of reasons. One, because maintain the impact and the value that we're putting within the podcast, but also there's a lot that goes in, like I said, to be able to sit down and have a really good conversation. But to your point there, the brand, we're lucky that we're not this massive corporate business. Like we're on the ground in the gyms, seeing what your everyday person requires from their fitness. How many times a week do they need to train? Where are we seeing the most results? What sort of guidance do we need to give them off the gym floor around lifestyle practices? What's the sort of the best dose of dieting, calorie deficits within a 12-month period for the average person that comes to a Marchon gym, based on the fact they might have kids, a job, and everything else? Like, we're able to learn all that stuff in person with our gyms. 3,000 people online. We're able to get feedback from the shred, from the game program, from the High Rocks program. Are people getting better at quicker times at High Rocks? Are people putting more kilograms on their deadlift on the game program? Are people dropping body fat on the shred program? Pulling all that data. Same with the supplements. What are you interested in? What am I interested in? What's Liam interested in? What are the Calvert's interested in? What is anyone in the business interested in? And do we have specific knowledge, expertise, resource and time to be able to go and create a product or a service that we're genuinely passionate about? And it might not even be create a product or a service that we sell. It might be just acquire some knowledge that bolsters a product or service that we're currently doing. And I think that's why we're able to create this brand that has a few different strands to what it does, but it's all around our own interests and shared passions. Yeah, I come up with a lot of the ideas, but I think there's many other people that kind of contribute to, or let's try this piece of apparel, or let's try this supplement.
Yeah, amazing. So just to finish off, you did say you were going to say some thank yous. So just to wrap it up, so who would you like to thank for the support and contributions to the podcast? And then what do you want the listeners to be doing during their break? We're not going to announce a relaunch just yet, but like you said, we are going to take our time to build that bank up and make sure that we're giving people the most amount of value. So in that meantime, what do you want people doing?
Thank yous first, or what do I want people doing?
Yeah, thank yous first, and then we'll finish out with the call to action for people that are listening and wanting more.
First, thank you is going to go to you. I think you've been pretty integral in the success of the podcast. You've been a brilliant co-host. The feedback actually from some really trusted peers in my close circle about you has been really fantastic. So well done to you. I think it's evident of the superstar you are and what you bring to the business. So first, thank yous there, not only for co-hosting, but also be able to fucking make sure the mics work. I think the other thank yous to the guests. Like I said, we've been really deliberate in making sure that everyone comes into the studio, sits down, and gives up a few hours of their life. We have had offers from some cool guests to do it via Zoom, and we've politely declined. So big thanks to the guests that made the effort. And then the listeners. I think we've had, I think our stats, I mean, I don't have much context to measure it against, but I know you've got a bit of more insight in that world, and we can, see how other podcasts are done. The listeners have been super bought into what we're doing. Feedback's been great. The shares on social media, the likes, the subscribes, the comments, they've been fantastic. So a massive thank you to those people. I think that's really everyone. Don't want to really need to thank my mum and dad and my wife for getting me here. There's my thank yous. And then in terms of what I want people to do, I think just, we put a lot of content out. If you think about the number of people within the business, particularly from a coaching standpoint, coaching and nutrition, I think that's where most people follow us. I think if you follow any one of our coaches, particularly the guys in the online space, Paddy, Josh, Liam, Chad, Jade, even the coaches within our gyms, if you can resonate with wanting to be stronger, wanting to be fitter, wanting to understand the things that can sometimes be confusing in the world, then just follow the gym pages, our coaches pages, follow Liam for nutrition, and just stay engaged through the DMs. I think what we're very good at is trying to get back to as many people as possible and having really strong connections with the community through in-person events, but also through that dialogue in DMs and also on the app. So stay there for the time being. If you've got anything burning, you can always reach out to me in the DMs. I did put a poll out a little while ago about guests that people wanted on. So I've made a list of those people. And if anyone is listening that wants to come on, that feels as though they should come on, you need to have a good reason. But feel free to reach out and fight your cause, because it'd be cool to have some of our listeners, if they've got some value to bring, sat opposite me.
Here's to season 2.
Here's to season 2.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks, mate.